With Helldivers, the question has always been, why are the players so opposite of the studio, especially when it comes to the vision of what this game was meant to be? Now, this is a question as old as the game itself, but recent community posts are again popping up asking why the studio fights the players tooth and nail when it comes to feedback. And for that, we're going to need to take a deep dive, including the past and present, so stay tuned. If you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe. If you're on mobile, please swipe to hype the video. And now, let's dive into the latest with Helldivers.
One of the things that I've always noticed with some of these games that'll come out, they will almost always ruin it in some way very quickly. Very quickly. Like removing or destroying something that players enjoyed because they don't think that it's like balanced to the game correctly. Like Helldivers 2, great example of this. Those guys, for like a good straight year, had no idea what they were doing. They had no idea. They were fighting against their own customers when their customers said, we want a power fantasy. And then the developers are like, well, that's not the game we were trying to make. Well, it is the game that you made. It's what people enjoyed the most. It's why you got all these sales. You can't go after the fact and say, I know that you really liked that, but this is actually supposed to be a hardcore game. That's not what they bought. You shouldn't have released it in that state if you thought it was something else.
Recent Helldivers community comments and posts have been raising the question of why Arrowhead was and is still making things so damn difficult. Not in terms of the mission design or mission difficulty. I mean, Helldivers has never really been about that, but more so when it comes to creating the game the players are wanting. LegendaryDrops pushed out that short you just viewed not long ago, and out of his more recent shorts, it's one of his most viewed. This Helldivers themed discussion is more popular than, say, others he's posted about Crimson Desert, Take-Two, Netflix, OpenAI, and even games journalism, proving not only the staying power of Helldivers 2, but also, in a more focused discussion point, that the topic of studio versus gamer, Arrowhead's vision versus what they delivered to gamers, is still very much a potent debate within the community. You see, back when Helldivers 2 first launched in February 2024 and was already going through its stratospheric rise to stardom, players were coming to grips with its systems, and for the most part, we were figuring it out. The best weapons, the best stratagems, and tactics were quickly spreading throughout the player base as divers helped divers to overcome the challenges and advance through the tiers of difficulty. Then came update 1.000.100, as Arrowhead, seeing the big three of the Breaker, the Shield Backpack, and the Railgun, stepped in and reduced the effectiveness of each of those pieces. It was at this point that the studio started to show its intent with Helldivers 2. It was at this point that the studio started to make its true colors and its intent and its vision with Helldivers 2 known, even going so far as to lash out at the community outrage aimed at that patch, as a developer back then started off their comments with, "I'm feeding the rage a little for my own entertainment here," going on to say they had made two of the most brainless playstyles less viable and brought the guns that under or overperformed more into line with the rest. To his credit, Pilestedt, who was at the time still serving as the CEO of Arrowhead, stepped in and actually apologized to the community, saying that this was not a message the studio stood behind and that they were taking actions internally to educate their developers on how to represent the organization. However, as they say, the cat was now out of the bag, and the player base was now getting its first glimpse of what Arrowhead intended Helldivers 2 to be. It seemed that what we were being pushed away from what the back cover of Helldivers game box advertised with its battle cry to players of spread democracy with overpowered weapons while working as a team to overcome impossible odds to just impossible odds. And the back of the box has been used throughout the past 2 years to push back against Arrowhead when they get into one of their enemies get everything, players get nothing design shticks. Later in March 2024, and probably sensing the developing tensions between consumer and studio, we received the famous update on balancing the firepower in Helldivers 2 dev blog from head of product testing at Arrowhead, Patrick Lasota. This now infamous post went on to outline why changes were made to certain meta items, taking weapons like the railgun on a roller coaster ride of moving from powerful but bugged to absolutely gutted and pretty much everywhere in between. Fast forwarding to August 2024, we got another glimpse behind the curtain as Arrowhead unleashed the Escalation of Freedom update, along with Freedom's Flame Warbond. EOF ushered in wholesale changes to fire, among other things, effectively changing everything about how fire weapons worked overnight and just days before the fire-centric Freedom's Flame Warbond dropped. Despite ushering in things that players liked, like difficulty 10 and more, the game's long-term health was in serious doubt. Escalation of Freedom nearly cost Arrowhead everything as player counts dipped dangerously low. By September, the game was seeing historic lows for daily active users, and it took Arrowhead altering the game with several buff-centric patches, along with the longer 63-day patch to get the game holistically into a better spot. More recently, despite the community telling the devs they liked where the Coyote assault rifle was and to not touch it, the devs openly poked fun back at the players, worried that they as a studio would eventually nerf it.
So what did you change with the Coyote?
Let's see. Where is it?
Where did you put the Coyote?
Where did I put the Coyote?
Did you put it at the...
Oh wait, we didn't do anything.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
But interesting.
Apparently, we forgot to change the Coyote.
Going so far as to include it in one of their dev vlogs, stating that there were no changes made to the Coyote, only for the community. To find out shortly thereafter that while the Coyote had not been altered, many internal and hidden changes were made to the game to increase things like fire ignition points on more common enemies and to reduce fire tick damage on those enemies as well. Both of these had an effect on the Coyote's effectiveness, and once found out, players called the studio out for their earlier statements and how they had lied about not touching the weapon, a fact that Nicholas Malmberg admitted to while on live stream. The Coyote needed it or it didn't need it, that's not relevant here, but what is the way it was done. To take the players' feedback, stating that they liked the weapon where it was, to then process that feedback, to play off of the player base's fears that it would be nerfed, to poke fun at those fears, to then lie about the changes, to only come clean about those changes once caught, it drove yet another stake between studio's vision and players' desires, widening the chasm between the two. There are players to this date that mark that event as the turning point for them, pushing them firmly into the camp of never trusting Arrowhead ever again. Through the past year, we've seen things like players' health pools dramatically reduced and bleed damage buffed by 10 times, making us divers much more fragile than before, often dying in tenths of a second or dying even while stemmed. More recently, players finally received an item they have been calling for since 2024. A full-on Helldiver tank. However, alongside that new addition to our armories, new changes were also made to enemies, greatly buffing their damage output versus all the Helldivers' armored gear, like the FRV, like exosuits, and yes, the Bastion tank. Were these changes made for the health of the game, to make it more enjoyable and a fun experience for its players, or were they made to appease those within the studio that were wanting Helldivers to be steered to their initial and quirky vision of it being a hardcore milsim, drawing roots from Escape from Tarkov and Arma? Even if that was what the game was originally intended to be, as the earlier clip from LegendaryDrops stated, it's not the game they delivered. And if that vision was what Arrowhead intended, it should have never been launched the way it was in the first place. We'll return to this vision for Helldivers 2 topic in just a moment, because that issue of the game not knowing what it wanted to be over the first year of its life is actually a very real topic even today. As this Reddit post asks, why does it seem to bother them so much when players do well? It actually feels like anytime the player base finds a new strategy or some niche interaction between stratagems, they remove it. Anytime a weapon becomes halfway viable, they apply a rebalance. When players get too good at a specific faction, they just add insta-kill and ragdoll attacks into the mix. Less than a day ago, this Reddit post also popped up asking the all-important question: why is it that we have to fight the game devs tooth and nail to make positive changes to the game? Now, this is a wall of text, but the OP Fun Shoulder 4612 does go on to state a very important fact towards the end of their post. Here's what they said. I know it's a decisive thing to discuss, but not a single one of us purchased this game because we wanted an extremely realistic tactical experience of being a frontlines pathetic grunt who serves the war machine. which to be clear is an effing cool idea, but that's not the game you made. You are not Ready or Not. You are not All Quiet on the Western Front, and you will never be. That's not the game you made. That's not the setting you created. That is not the community you gathered. So stop pretending to be that when you are so much better at something completely different.
Yep.
So we've got the studio's vision for Helldivers that comes through when changes are made to the game versus what players are wanting, as was advertised in the back of the box, which seemed to be within a constant struggle against one another, with the players often asking what in the hell the studio was thinking. And for that, we might as well turn to Pilestedt himself, who during a Nordic Game Conference presentation in 2024 gives us Arrowhead's design vision for this game.
So Helldivers 2 was originally envisioned, this is the original hypothesis, is that Helldivers is a co-op action shooter where you play as the evil guys in the galaxy, so you're stormtroopers or whatever it might be in pop culture. And how would you fare as one of the extras in the background? Like, you know, when they try to breach the cell block in Star Wars. And the first stormtrooper through the door, he of course gets shot in the chest by Han Solo. And that's the question of, would you do better climbing into that room trying to capture the bad guys that are trying to take over your lovely Death Star? They should have realized that Death Star is... we can get into that later. And then also, would you be able to survive in a galactic war without plot armor to protect you? It's really the question that we ask with Helldivers. And this then turned into the original vision for Helldivers, which is that we wanted to do as realistic of a take on what it would be to be in one of those squads of stormtroopers or starship troopers, mobile infantry, or whatever pop culture grunts that you can imagine. In an unforgiving galactic resource war, where players together complete operations against alien foes. And this is just the core of what Helldivers is.
Recently, we've seen Arrowhead release 3 solid war bonds in a row, with Redacted Regiment, Siege Breakers, and Entrenched Division, showing that when they want to and when they're motivated to, they can produce content that players find enjoyable. Arrowhead also finally did something with the One True Flag, although for some, it's not enough. All this came after, when asked about the flag, we were told that it was just a flag, and that as a whole, the studio was trying to keep the game grounded. Suppressed weapons were finally adjusted to give them a meaningful characteristic besides just sounding different, as in a different sound effect in-game to other weapons. However, it's important to mention that both of these changes came after much community pushback, including posts, videos, and more, landed squarely on Arrowhead. But again, the question still lingers, why? Why does Arrowhead consistently take this one step forward, 3 steps back approach with their changes made to Helldivers 2? And for those of us who have been with this game from launch, I think it's pretty clear that there's a pattern to these changes centered around that hardcore grunt fantasy vision Johan spoke about. Why pivot to what the majority of the gamers want, sell more copies of your game, attract new players, and create a worldwide phenomena based on that player feedback, when you can instead alienate the majority of those players, really lay into your hardcore milsim grunt fantasy, and keep a fraction of the over 20 million players worldwide still engaged with your game? However, this seems to be Arrowhead in a nutshell, even going so far as to say a game for everyone is a game for no one, expressing their desire to make these off-kilter, super niche experiences that would only appeal to a fraction of the current Helldivers player base. Speaking of those copies sold, now rumored to be over 20 million worldwide, here's a thought that just came to me. If Arrowhead published a game they actually didn't set out to make, and then they fought tooth and nail against their consumers for the past 2 years about how that game is supposed to play out, what if all of that was reversed? Just hear me out. Helldivers 2 is Sony's fastest selling game of all time. It's won numerous awards and gone up against elite levels of competition from AAA studios to earn those victories. But what if the studio wasn't actually fighting so damn hard against the players' feedback? What if the content updates had been properly tested instead of prioritizing new stuff getting rammed out the door while the tech debt piled up? Would it have sold even more? Would it have garnered even more awards? And would it have further solidified itself as a generational gaming experience? I honestly don't know, but it's something to think about for sure. All that said, it seems pretty clear that now, after 2 years of playing Helldivers 2 and seeing the seesaw the studio makes with the game changes, especially like, say, what they did right after launch, the game they set out to make and the game they delivered are two wildly different products. There's also discussions within the Helldivers player base about factions existing within the studio, which lead to these swings in player-friendly and then screw the players type changes. Why else would we see new weapons and gear introduced into the game, but at the same time, internal and many times hidden changes also installed that are designed to lessen the effects of the new weapons and gear we just received? Why was fire altered so dramatically when Escalation of Freedom went live into the game? Why were enemies buffed versus already weak Helldivers armored vehicles? And for that matter, why were player health pools and bleed effects altered so much, leading to faster and more inconsistent death sequences? For that and the rest of this discussion, I now turn to you, my viewers. What are your theories as to why it seems Arrowhead fights us tooth and nail to deliver the gaming experience most players want? And why do we see this positive plus negative method of introducing items into the game, whereby the new item is delivered, but underlying changes are made to the game to lessen how effective said new item will be? Please drop a comment down below with your feedback and thoughts, as I'm genuinely interested in what you have to say. If you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe and ring the notifications bell to receive my future upload alerts. If you're on mobile, please swipe to hype the video. And before I go, I'd like to extend a huge thanks to all of our hardcore channel members, for without your support, content like this would not be possible. Until the next one, this is LtBuzzLitebeer, signing off.